us now to discuss Dr. Scott Gottlieb, former FDA commissioner. He sits on the boards of Pfizer and Illumina as a CNBC contributor. Dr. Gottlieb, great to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks.
I guess great progress on that front, but a step back with the J&J vaccine. I know you've been on a bit earlier on the week to discuss this, but sum it up for us. Has this been a gross overreaction, or do you support the actions that have been taken?
Well, look, I think it was prudent for the FDA to take a close look at this. And a lot of the J&J vaccine was used in the last 3 weeks. So 50% of the doses that were delivered were in the last 3 weeks. So if there are these rare side effects associated with the vaccine, they're going to identify it this week and probably next week. You're going to be able to find these cases. So I think it's prudent for the FDA to try to fully characterize this. I do believe this is an important product. I believe even if this is a rare side effect associated with the vaccine, it's going to come back to the market, perhaps with additional labeling language to advise physicians and patients on what to be alert for, maybe with some restrictions, maybe with an age-based restriction on the use of the vaccine for a short period of time until we better understand its full profile. But remember, this is a vaccine that's important that in ways that are differentiated from the other vaccines, in that it's delivered as a single dose, and it also has easier storage requirements. So I think as a global product to try to address the global pandemic, this is an important vaccine.
I was wondering what your hopes were of the U.S. reaching herd immunity by the end of the summer, and whether that gives you confidence that a second lockdown, or not second lockdown, we've had multiple lockdowns, another lockdown won't be required. It was interesting commentary coming out of the UK this week where vaccination rates are pretty high, and yet they're still talking about the possible risk and need for further lockdowns going forward.
Look, I don't think we're going to have to do anything near what we did this past year. I don't think we're going to have to close businesses in the way we did this past year, assuming nothing unexpected happens with the variants that we're seeing pop up around the world, and assuming that the vaccine is still going to be protective against those new strains as they emerge. But I do think life's going to be different. I think we're going to do things differently in the wintertime as coronavirus starts to circulate, probably later in the fall or more likely in the winter. It's going to be frowned upon coming to work sick. I think direct-to-consumer home testing is going to be more commonplace. People are going to test themselves more for coronavirus and the flu. So I think we're going to behave differently in trying to restrict the spread of this virus. But I think it's going to be against the backdrop of largely normal activity, just with more precautions around respiratory health in the wintertime. And we're going to pick up a lot of benefits from that in terms of reduced flu spread, because a lot of the mitigation steps that we've taken for coronavirus, trying to prevent spread of coronavirus, were very effective against flu. So I think there will be productivity gains from, an overlay of some more prudent activity about the spread of respiratory diseases in the wintertime.
One factor that could determine how much we return to normal, Dr. Gottlieb, is this issue of whether vaccinated people can transmit. So if we see a lot of people start going back to the office and going back to bars and restaurants after they've been vaccinated, do they present a risk to their kids at home that are not vaccinated?
They do, to some extent. What we've seen from the data so far is that people who are vaccinated are less likely to develop an infection. They're certainly less likely to develop symptomatic disease from the infection, and they're less likely to transmit the infection. We haven't fully characterized the magnitude of that, but we believe it's quite profound. But less likely doesn't mean completely unlikely. So there are going to be cases where people who are fully vaccinated either develop symptomatic COVID or more likely develop the infection and will have a window in which they're probably contagious. So I think even people who are fully vaccinated, I think in a high prevalence environment, if you're dealing in an environment where there's a lot of COVID around and you think you're likely to come into contact with that disease, and you're around people who are unprotected, either because they couldn't get vaccinated, didn't get vaccinated, and they're vulnerable, or they're young children, I still think you need to be prudent. So that's why I think you're seeing a lot of public health officials still urge some caution in high prevalent environments like Michigan, even for individuals who are fully vaccinated. But if we're in a low prevalence environment where you're less likely to come into contact with the infection and you're vaccinated, so you're less likely to become infected even if you come into contact with it, then the probability is much lower. And I think you can make, more judicious decisions to go out and about and, normally.
Shepard Smith here. Thanks for watching CNBC on YouTube.